Today, we are talking about something huge, a massive shift in India's legal system. We're diving into the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita, a brand new criminal code for the entire nation.
Just think about that for a second. What if the entire rulebook for crime in India, the very thing that's defined right and wrong for over a century and a half, was just completely rewritten? Well, in 2023, that's exactly what happened. The Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita, or the BNS for short, officially took the place of the 63-year-old Indian Penal Code. So let's roll up our sleeves and break down what's actually inside this new legal framework.
All right, first things first, we have to start with the anatomy of a crime. Before we can get to the big, flashy changes, we need to understand the very language of the law itself. You know, the fundamental definitions that everything else is built on. These are the new building blocks for justice in India.
Okay, let's start with a word that seems simple: document. The new code in Section 2.8 makes a point to explicitly include electronic and digital records. Now, this might not sound like a big deal, but it is. It officially brings the law into the 21st century, recognizing that today, the most crucial evidence is often sitting right there in our emails, our text messages, and all our digital files.
And it's not just about technology. Look at how gender is defined. Section 210 now says the pronoun he is basically a universal placeholder for any person, and it specifically calls out male, female, and transgender individuals. That's a really significant step towards making the language of the law more inclusive, right from the very beginning.
You know, in so many crimes, it all boils down to intent. The BNS has a very specific definition for acting dishonestly. It's not just about telling a lie. It's about doing something with the specific intention of causing a wrongful financial gain for one person or a wrongful loss for someone else. This idea is the absolute bedrock for proving crimes like theft and fraud.
Now, this example from the code itself is chilling. It shows how the law deals with what's called common intention. Take a close look here. Neither jailer physically attacks the prisoner. They're found guilty because they both decided to not do something. They illegally omitted to provide food. It's a powerful lesson that in the eyes of the law, a deliberate failure to act can be just as deadly and just as criminal as pulling a trigger.
So, we've seen how a crime gets its definition. But what about those situations where something harmful happens but it isn't considered a crime? Well, that brings us to our next section, the shield of exceptions. The law is smart enough to know that not all harm is criminal, and it actually provides a kind of protective shield in some very specific situations.
And this really gets to a core question, right? Is every single act that causes harm a crime? Well, according to the new BNS, the answer is a very clear no. And here's why.
See, the law gets that life is complicated. An act that looks criminal on the surface might be excused. Maybe it was a complete accident. Maybe it was done by a child who's just too young to understand what they were doing. Or maybe it was done to prevent an even worse harm from happening, or it was done in self-defense. In these cases, the law says, you know what, criminal blame just doesn't apply here.
This example of preventing greater harm is just so vivid. I mean, pulling down someone's house is a huge deal, obviously a harmful act. But if you're doing it to create a fire break that's going to save an entire town, the law doesn't see that as a crime. It sees it as a necessary choice. It's the classic real-life trolley problem, choosing the lesser of two evils.
Okay, so we've got the building blocks and we've got the exceptions. Now let's get into the heart of the BNS, redefining major crimes. This is where we'll look at some of the most significant, most talked about changes in the new code, stuff that affects everything from homicide to terrorism.
Now here's one of the most critical lines drawn in all of criminal law, the difference between culpable homicide and murder. The easiest way to think about it is this. All murder is a type of culpable homicide, but not all culpable homicide is murder. The key difference? It's all about the degree of intention and knowledge. If death is just a likely outcome of your actions, it's culpable homicide. But it crosses that line into murder when it's done with a much higher degree of intention, or the knowledge that death isn't just likely, it's almost certain.
For the very first time in India's main penal code, we now have a specific definition for organized crime. And Section 111 is really clear. This isn't about a single crime. No, this is about a continuing unlawful activity carried out by a whole group, a criminal syndicate, all for the purpose of making money or gaining some kind of material benefit.
And the scope of this is just massive. We're talking about everything from kidnapping and contract killing to land grabbing and major cybercrimes. By putting all these serious offenses under the single umbrella of organized crime, The BNS has created a brand new, powerful legal tool designed to take down entire criminal networks, not just one person at a time. The BNS also brings in a new, very specific definition for a terrorist act. And the focus here in Section 113 isn't just on the violence of the act itself. The real key is the intent behind it. Was the goal to threaten the very unity and security of India, or was it to strike terror into the hearts of the general public? That intent is what defines it. So we can really break this down into three key ingredients. First, you have the intent, to threaten the nation or create terror. That intent then leads to the act, using things like bombs, weapons, or other dangerous substances. And finally, that act leads to the result: death, destruction, or disrupting the country's essential services. For something to be legally defined as terrorism under this code, all three of those parts have to be there.
So, we've looked at new definitions, new crimes, and new ways of thinking about the law. But what does this all add up to? Let's zoom out for our final section and ask the big question. Is this a new code for justice? What are the bigger implications of all these changes?
And here's one of the most interesting new additions: the formal introduction of community service as a punishment. For certain smaller offenses, courts can now order someone to do work that actually benefits society. This is a bigger deal than it sounds. It's more than just an alternative to a fine or jail time. It really signals a potential shift in philosophy, away from pure punishment and towards a more reformative, more restorative kind of justice.
So, from updating definitions for our digital world to creating new weapons to fight organized crime and terrorism, the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita is, without a doubt, a radical overhaul of India's legal landscape. It's a massive effort to build a justice system that fits the 21st century. But the biggest question of all still hangs in the air. How will this brand new rulebook truly change the story of crime and punishment for over 1 billion people?